come in early with that problem, make it big, and make it affect every part of your character's life, and you'll have a story that really hooks your readers.
Because without conflict, without change, without a problem, there isn't really a compelling story.
Welcome to a very special episode of the Novelry on Writing. To celebrate our brand new prize, The Next Big Story, we've got 5 bonus episodes here to help you write a standout entry, delving into the 5 elements that make a story great. 1. Person. 2. Problem. 3. Place. 4. Plot. And 5. Prose. Now, we're going to dig into these in the next episodes, and you can watch them whether it's on your lunch break, whether you're out at work, whether you're cooking in the evening, wherever you can find the time. Because story ideas can come to you anytime and any place. For the next big story, we're offering a grand prize of $100,000 for just 3 pages of writing. Yes, just 3 pages of the beginning of a novel, that's all. So, what should those pages include? Let's find out in this very special podcast episode. This is the Novelry on Writing.
Hi, I'm Melanie Conklin. I'm the author of 5 books for young readers and a writing coach at the Novelry, and I'm here today with the lovely Amanda Reynolds.
Hi, Melanie. I'm Amanda Reynolds, and I am the author of 6 psychological thrillers and also very pleased to be an author coach at the Novelry. It's great to be here today talking about problems.
Your problem is what your character is facing in the story, right? It's the challenge that they have to overcome. And it's the whole reason that we want to read your story. So it's really important to pick a problem that's nice and meaty, right, Amanda?
Absolutely. I think if you're thinking about writing for the first time and you really don't know where to start, because it's hard to know where your story should begin, think about creating a huge, great big obstacle for your main character and try and think of them as being really, really ill suited to deal with that problem as well. So if you bring those 2 elements together, you've got the wrong person and you've got like this huge problem that they need to deal with. You've already got quite a lot of conflict wrapped up in your idea.
Absolutely. I love that. That the way you phrase that is perfect. They're ill suited for the challenge that they're facing, because it's not super interesting to read a story if someone has all the skills they need and can easily fix their problem. Well, then you're not going to have a whole book about that, right? But when we make that problem something that's really big and that they're ill suited for, then they're going to have a lot of challenges. And it's going to be so interesting to read that person's story. I was wondering if maybe we could expand a little on what we mean when we say a big problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to save the whole world. Sometimes it means that the problem goes deeper than just what's happening out in the world and what they're trying to fix. Maybe the problem also affects them in their heart and emotionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I always feel that personal is very relatable. We all go through stuff in our lives and we all have problems to deal with. And when we read, it's great to feel seen, to feel connected to that problem, even if it's something we've never been through. There will be reactions of the characters and the way that they try and surmount these problems or have to deal with a big dilemma that we can kind of vicariously enjoy with them, but at the same time, in that safe way of reading the story. So I think for beginning to develop a character who's got to come up with a way of dealing with something, it's always good to look inside ourselves without making it about ourselves, just to think about the connections that we have with the person who's listening or reading our story and thinking, what is it about our life that we can use our experience, not directly autobiographically, but the emotion that we go through, the way we care about people, we do anything to protect the people we love, all those kind of things that are very relatable and we all experience in our lives. And then what happens if that was threatened, or what happens if I have to come out of my comfort zone and really do something I wouldn't normally do in order to protect someone I love, for instance.
Yeah, I love that. We all know what it's like to struggle with a challenge and to have to try repeatedly to address that challenge. What makes it even harder is, say, if you're in a fantasy story and you have magical powers that might allow you to save the world, what makes that problem even more important for the character is if in saving the world, they're also trying to save their little brother,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So we give them that emotional connection to the problem. And we also make it really hard for them to solve it. So maybe they have magic and they're trying to save their little brother, but they don't know how to control their magic yet. And so then we have a great big challenge ahead of us, because you've not only got to figure out how to save the sibling, you've also got to grow as a person and change as a character in order to address that problem. So it's really that interaction that we have between who the character is and the problem they're facing that
Mm.
makes the story so gripping for our readers. You know, people often ask, how soon should I introduce that problem?
Mm.
And my opinion is sooner than later. I always really like it if when the book opens, the character is already in the problem and they already are facing a challenge. Something has changed in their world that they're already not okay with and they're not adjusting well to. And then your inciting moment comes along and kicks off their journey to face that problem. So I always like to have that problem kind of already simmering in the background. Is that what you do in your books as well, Amanda?
Absolutely. I mean, in my books, it's not necessarily magical powers, it's much more that danger or that threat or that problem that you might face at home. So my characters are already in their situation, they're already in their world, and something happens that really unsettles that world, that changes it, exactly as you said, that moment right at the beginning, as quickly as possible. Don't have loads of setup, let the reader catch up, get straight into that moment of, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on here? How is this person going to ever live their life from this point forward? And that doesn't mean that it's something really dramatic. It doesn't have to be a bomb going off. It could be picking up a phone and finding a message, picking up somebody else's phone and finding a message, even more, So it doesn't have to be that kind of earth shattering. It just has to be that moment beyond which nothing is ever going to be exactly as it was. And how is your main character going to deal with that? Because without conflict, without change, without a problem, there isn't really a compelling story that's going to hook your readers in.
I'm Jan Martel, the author of Life of Pi, The High Mountains of Portugal, and Self, and I'm delighted to be a judge for the next big story from the novel. My fellow judges and I are looking for fresh voices in fiction. No experience necessary. You could win $100,000 for just 3 pages of a story, and the opportunity to turn your story idea into a novel. So start writing and enter today. See the website for details, terms, and conditions.
I know from my stories, which are more realistic fiction, my characters are usually facing a problem that is physical and external, but they also are really battling with an emotional challenge. So, for example, in my debut novel, Counting Time,
Mm.
the main character, her family has just relocated from California all the way across the country to New York City, and they're there for her little brother's cancer treatment. So it's very important and they have every reason to be there. But for Time, as the older sibling, she's had to give up her entire life in order to go and have this treatment for her brother.
Yeah.
And so the opening of the story, they're already in New York City. They have already arrived, and it's hitting her
Mm.
how foreign the place feels, how alone she feels. You know, all of those things that build your life have just been taken away from her. And so that's a really big challenge,
Mm.
especially as an 11-year-old. How do you address that? You know, she desperately wants to go back home, but she also really wants her little brother to get better. So she is in a very tight spot. And that's what we want to do, right? We want to make that challenge for your
Mm.
character really heavy. You don't always have to have a life on the line, but usually you have some kind of a threat to your existence. And it may just be your social life. It doesn't
Mm.
always have to be a body on the first
No.
page. However, it is really fun when we do have a body early in the
It
story.
doesn't always have to be a body on the first stage. I mean, who hasn't been a teen who's sort of hankered for something different, even if it's just like being able to be on your own for a while, so that's so relatable. Yeah, I think in my books I try to take the ordinary situation that we're all familiar with, and in that domestic setting think, how can I push this into an extraordinary place? Because the other thing we have to think about is we can give our main characters a really terrible problem. We can think of something dreadful, but we have to also
Mhm.
think about making this story believable and plausible. So we have to walk a line between pushing our readers to go with us on this really dramatic and interesting and extraordinary story, but also at the same time thinking about that authenticity that we want to give our characters, thinking about, yeah, that could happen. If I was in that set of circumstances, if I found myself in that terrible place that the main character's in, maybe, just maybe, I would do the questionable things that they've decided to do. I can sort of get why they did that, even if I wouldn't do it myself. And it's that balance, isn't it, Melanie, between kind of exciting and interesting and different and a great read. And yeah, that's relatable. I do believe it hasn't stretched my credulity too far. I can still go with that story. I still believe in the problem and the reactions of the character.
For sure. My favorite phrase that I like to use when I'm thinking about the problem for my story is what if? Just
Mm,
like you said, you take a scenario that's pretty plausible and you say, what if this happened? So my stories always start with that what if, which is literally the
yeah,
problem that happens to you in your world.
yeah,
So that can be really helpful for writers if
so
they're trying to
powerful.
define
Yeah.
what their problem is, right?
Yeah, so powerful. I think I've pretty much done that for all of my books. So my last one that I wrote, Her Husband's Lie, I thought, what if the person that you feel that you really should trust the most, not just in your personal life, but in a wider sense, who would that be, and how terrible would it be if they were no longer possibly trustworthy? And I thought, who do we really trust? And I thought, we trust a really high up consultant. And who do we women really trust? We trust a gynecologist. So I made my suspicious main character a man that we women all put our trust in. And if you can try and look for that huge sort of dramatic irony, like this should be the person that we really, really trust. They're a pillar of society, they're a husband, a father, a trusted, long standing consultant. But hang on a minute, what if they're also a murderer, say? Possibly. So, when you can give these sort of juxtapositions of somebody who should be trusted and actually isn't, that can be a really interesting way to also create problems and your protagonist from your antagonist, the person who's going to like come in and mix everything up and really make those problems even worse.
I love the way you just put that. And I like how you're describing that we don't just adjust the problem or the plot that, our character is facing. We also adjust the character. Because sometimes you realize with us a little tweak to your character, you can amplify that conflict because there are different layers to conflict that we can explore. There
Mm,
is man versus man, which we're very accustomed to.
mm,
That's the antagonist you were just mentioning. So your
mm,
main character has an enemy. That's man versus man. There's also man versus nature, which is when the setting is contributing to the antagonism against your character. There's a storm that's washed out the bridges. So they're trapped on the island where there's the serial killer.
yeah.
Nature's working against them too. And then there's also man versus self
Mm,
because we're our own worst problems most
okay.
of the
Yeah.
time. And so we really like to dig into that and adjust that character, adjust the details
Mm,
about them and their personality so that it makes the conflict as strong and gripping for your reader as
mm.
possible. Because the whole point of all of this is to keep people reading the books, right?
Absolutely. That's our job at the end of the day, is to, make the reader want to read on. And, if you're writing just a few pages, you've got to really hook people in those first few pages. You've got to make them think, right from the start. I'm really interested in the problem. I'm interested in the place. I'm interested in the person. So much that it's got to do. But at the same time, one of my sort of top tips for problem would be think about the problem in relation to your character. Think about what would be the worst thing for that person in that place at that time. And be quite brave in that. As human beings, we like to solve problems. So as soon as we put a problem in the way, we think, how can we fix that? How can we make that better? But really, what we're going to keep doing is throwing more rocks. We're going to make it harder and harder and harder. And that sort of goes against the grain. And sometimes, as writers, I don't know if you've been in this position, but I have a lot of times, I don't know how I'm going to solve it. I'm just going to make it as difficult as possible. And then I'm going to have to work out how the main character is going to overcome all of these problems that I've given them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about problems. Remember, writers, come in early with that problem, make it big, and make it affect every part of your character's life, and you'll have a story that really hooks your readers.
Thank you. Absolutely. Been lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so pleased to have you along for the writing journey, and we hope to see you on another episode of The Novelry on Writing. If you'd like to learn more, visit us at thenovelry.com. From first draft to finished manuscript, at The Novelry you'll enjoy one-to-one coaching from best-selling authors, live writing classes with award-winning authors and literary agents, and you'll work with a publishing editor all the way for submission to literary agents toward a publishing deal. All writers learn from other writers, even the greats. Write your novel in good company. Join us at The Novelry. We'll show you how to start, coax your story into shape, cheer you on to type the end.